everyone, it's Kerry back with you today. I've been making these little journals using these lovely brown and blue tones from our vintage journal kit, and I had several people ask for a tutorial showing how I had created these. Now for these ones with the metal ring binding, I've used a Zata bind it all machine. I've had it for a long time. They're quite old now, I think, but there's several different types of binding machines. I've heard people talking about a cinch, and basically it just gives you a binding mechanism for your book, but you could use book rings or anything like that that binds your pages together. But if you don't have access to one of those machines, I've also created these two small slim journals without the use of a binding machine. This one just has a few pages in it. You can see it's still very skinny, so you could slot that into a pocket in a journal. And I've basically just stitched my signature into this one. This one is the same sort of method, but I've given this one a thicker spine, and I've been able to bind quite a few more pages into this. You could actually make the spine even thicker if you wanted to, but I'll show you all three of these methods today on how I've created these. So let's get started. So to create these journals, I've used our vintage journal kit set 1. I'll quickly have a flick through the kit now. So there's 6 different covers in these lovely brown and teal tones. Then there's 2 pages of lined journaling cards in both orientations. There's a selection of tea-stained papers if you would like to use those in your journal instead of using tea-dyed paper. There's a page with some tags, and then there's 6 pockets and envelopes to fit into the journal, all with the same coordinating colours. So to create our bound journal, I've taken one of the cover sheets and I've cut out this front section here, and then I have cut it in half like this. Then I've taken some cotton fabric, and this is one of the vintage saris, and this is a little bit stiff, this fabric, because it's very, very heavily starched. When I get them, they're very heavily starched, but you can of course wash that out if you prefer them to be soft. And I've torn this fabric to be roughly a centimetre larger than my paper panel here. So about that. And then I've just taken a glue stick because I'm going to stitch around the edges, but I don't want the panel to move while I'm trying to stitch it. And I'll just pop a little bit of glue on the back with glue stick, and then I line it up on my fabric. And then I'm just going to take this to my sewing machine and stitch a couple of rows of rough stitching around the edge. I don't want it to be too perfect because I like that sort of messy look, and it's a lot easier to make it messy than it is to make it neat. So I'll be back with that stitched in a sec. So now I've got my panels here stitched onto my fabric, and I want to figure out what size I would like my chipboard panel to be for my front cover. So I've got over to the side here just a piece of scrap chipboard, and I'm going to use the Zata machine. Now, depending on what sort of machine you have, this method will be slightly different. And if you're just using book rings, then you would just punch your book ring holes if you're having 2 or 3 book ring holes. But pop your holes into a test piece of chipboard first, or whatever you're using as your board, so that you know how much room you need to leave for your binding mechanism. So if I was to cover that fabric all the way over to the edge there, then my rings are going to struggle coming through the fabric. So I want to leave my rings exposed and make sure that I've got enough room here for my cover to come to the edge. So I've already worked out that I need roughly a centimetre here, and then I want my fabric to be slightly hanging over my other three edges. So I've already made my chipboard covers here with my holes in, and I know that these fit my panels. I've got a little bit of fabric hanging over these three sides like that, but my binding mechanism is, or my binding holes are free. But I don't like this white look here, so I'm just going to add a little bit of ink to blend the whiteness out of those parts of my cover. So I've inked up the edges there. I'm much happier with the way that blends in. So I'm just now going to go ahead and glue these panels down onto my chipboard covers. Just going to use some art glitter glue. And I'm just going to put the glue where the paper is. I don't want it to soak through my fabric and be visible from the front. So now I've got my covers ready. I need to determine what size I need to cut the papers for the inside of my journal. So to figure that out, I'm just going to measure roughly the width of my chipboard piece here and the height. So I've got around about 96 millimeters by 194 millimeters. So I want my pages to be slightly smaller than that. So I'll probably make my pages maybe 94 millimeters wide. They'll give me 2 millimeters on this side and they'll be flush on this side. And then I'll do 190 millimeters tall, which will give me 2 millimeters on this side and this side here. So I'll just go and cut my papers and I'll be back. So now I've cut my papers to fit into my journal and I've already punched the holes in here, but I'll just quickly explain to you about punching the holes with this machine. Depending on what machine you have, it will be different. So this middle arrow here tells you where the middle of your sheet will be if you want to have even holes on both sides. So if you take a piece of paper, just a sacrificial piece of paper that is cut to the same size as your pages for inside your journal, if you fold that piece of paper in half, and then when you open it up, just mark that fold line with a pen or something just to make it more visible. When you pop that sheet into the machine, you'll be able to see exactly where the middle of the sheet is, because this arrow will be easily lined up with this line that you've got. Then you can just use this sheet over and over again with your stack of papers behind it. So you'd grab your stack, you'd line them up, and then you'd pop them in the machine like this, and then you're going to line up this arrow and this line and then punch your holes, and then they'll always be in the same place as long as this guide paper is the same size as one of your actual papers. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're still unsure, there are lots of tutorials on YouTube on how to use this Sutter machine. So I've got my front and back covers here, and I've got my pages, and I've got my little spine mechanism that I need to put everything together. So that when this closes, it's hidden on the inside of the back cover of the book, I need to put my covers together, and then I need to make sure that I'm popping these spines or these spirals through the back cover first, so that when it will no longer twist, these bars that are stopping it from twisting any further are flush up against the back cover of the book. And then I'll go ahead and pop the rest of my pages on here. So now I've got my pages on here. My spine is still moving freely, and I want to seal up this hole now so the pages don't fall out. So I bring back my little machine. Now again, there's tutorials for this on YouTube because you need to have this gap sized according to this little chart down here for the rings that you're using. And then you just place it down inside and squeeze, and it should close up your rings so that your papers don't come off. So now we can flip everything around, open the front cover, and now our pages will move nicely on our ring, nothing's coming off, and that's closed just inside the back cover there. So that's our little journal ready to go and be embellished. So for our next little journal with the expandable spine, I have again taken one of the front and back covers and I've just cut it out around the edges. Now I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm just going to pop a little bit of glue on the inside. Doesn't have to be glued particularly well because I will be stitching this one as well. Once that's glued down, I'm going to go ahead and cut it straight down the middle here. I'm just going to neaten up my edges a little bit. I'm just going to ink around the edges. So I'm going to add some fabric in to expand my spine. This will allow me to add a lot more pages, but the book will still sit closed. If I added in too many pages, because it's quite a skinny book, it wouldn't close particularly well with a very thick spine. So I've cut or torn out 2 pieces of cotton here, and I've got a thicker one for the inside, because if I have too thick an edge on the front cover, it's going to cover up too much of my decoration. Now it doesn't matter particularly because this fabric's very sheer, but I don't want it to cover up too much of my decoration. So probably about that much spine. Now you could make it much thicker if you wanted to and have lots and lots of pages, but I just want to pop about 10 to 15 pages in mine. And I'm just going to use a little bit of art glitter glue along the edge here, and I just want a small amount just to tack it down because I'm going to stitch it. Trying to get it even on my strip here. I've got the same amount of strip at the bottom and the top. Then the same for the back cover. About there. Now it doesn't matter that I've got all this extra here, we can cut that off afterwards. And then I'm just going to use a bit of glue stick on the front here, because it's just to tack it into place until I have finished stitching. And just run that down there. So it's still going to give me enough of an edge to stitch along without interfering with any of my text here. So now I'm just going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch all the way around the edge of the front and the back. So I've stitched around my front cover and my back cover there, and you can see that that flips and folds really easily now. So I'll just trim off these edges, and I will pick some pages to put inside my journal. So I've got some coffee dyed papers here. I'm just going to work out what size that I need them to be for my journal. I'm not really going to measure anything specifically because every journal will be different, but I think you'll be able to see what I'm doing by watching the process, so I'll probably speed this up a little bit. So now I have this little journal here with the pages all stitched in, and that's another one ready to go. So this last one here is quite simple to make, and in this one I've stitched the signature in, but you could quite easily just use a stapler to staple that in. So I might show you the stapled in version. So to start with, I've got another cover here, and I'm just going to fold that in half and pressing that edge down, and then I'm going to fold it in half again. Now if you end up with a little edge here, you might want to trim that off before you do your stitching, so that when it's folded up you don't see the overhang along the edge here. Then I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'll stitch around the edge of the front cover, and then I'll also stitch around the edge of the back cover. Now I don't add any glue in between these two pages before I stitch. Sometimes I find if I put glue in it tends to pull it one way or the other, and then once I've stitched around the edges it will look something like this. And then I'll just trim these little threads off, and then I'll go ahead and ink around the edges of the front inside and out. So I've got my front cover inked and ready to add my pages. Now I don't want to add too many pages because this spine doesn't have a lot of room. If I put too many pages in, it's going to force the journal to stay open. So this is more like a little couple of page notebook sort of thing. So I'm just going to pick, I think I'll just take 2 pages, and it's pretty much the same method that I did for the other one, so I'll just speed this up again. So now I've got my pages ready to pop into my journal. So if I was stitching, I would just stitch straight down the middle or do a 3-hole pamphlet stitch. But if you wanted to staple the pages in, you could use a long arm stapler. In this case, my stapler would actually be long enough to reach the center of my spine. But if you didn't have a stapler that was long enough, you need to make sure that your pages are aligned correctly along the spine, and you turn your book upside down, and you need a piece of foam, quite thick foam, underneath, and open your stapler and line up where the staple comes out with the spine of your book, and just push down. Then pull it gently up out of your foam. Your staples will be open, so be careful you don't catch your fingers on them because they're quite sharp. And then just use a pen or the edge of your scissors or something to flatten them down. And then you've got another little notebook there ready to go. So if you want to make sure these staples don't catch, it's a good idea to cover them up with some washi tape, and to make sure the washi tape stays adhered, I'm just going to add a little bit of glue. Washi tape's good because it's not going to add too much bulk into the middle of your book and make it hard for the pages to close. So there we go, and there's another little notebook ready to pop into a journal or something. I've really enjoyed playing with this kit. I love the colours, and I like the fact that I've been able to make so many different types of journals using the same kit. I'll pop a link in the description box below to where you can find the kit. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you again next time. Bye! Shit, I did that wrong.